devout Catholic family. My mother was a devout Catholic. My dad was more along for the ride, if you will. Just kind of went with it to be in church with the family. Sang in the choir. I was an altar boy. I went to Catholic school. So I was definitely raised up with the understanding that Sundays are spent in church, and that kind of an upbringing. So my father had a really bad gambling addiction. And my father my parents stayed married my whole life. They never divorced. My father passed away in 22, but my parents stayed together my whole life. But my father had a bad gambling addiction, and he gambled a lot. And my parents they couldn't afford to send me to private school anymore, starting in 7th grade. So I went from private school to public school, and I didn't know anybody. I knew a couple of people that I'd met through like soccer and stuff like that, but I didn't really know anybody. And all my friends kind of, they went to private school. They went to the local private school that we had. And I just kind of started hanging out with people that I shouldn't have been hanging out with because I was ahead academically because I was in such a good school. So I didn't even do good in school, 7th and 8th grade, even though I knew the stuff we were talking about because I'd already learned it. But it's because I was far ahead and I got bored. So I didn't really care about school, right? And what ended up happening, I started hanging out with people I probably shouldn't have. And this isn't a shot at them. It's perfectly my choice, right? So what happens is then I started hanging out with other people. I got expelled my senior year of high school. I was allowed back in, thankfully, to graduate and walk with my class. So that was a good thing to have that. But after that, I kind of just started floundering. Went away from home for a while. The guys at Teen Challenge make fun of it sometimes. I actually went and I was a carny for a little while. I like drugs and they had a lot of drugs. So I went and lived that lifestyle for a little bit. Then I got very, very, very sick while I was doing that and ended up homeless in Louisiana for a little bit. It wasn't good. And then I came back home to Mississippi. And I ended up meeting a lady that I worked with, and we got pregnant very fast, like 3 weeks after knowing each other. And I had a little boy 9 months later. His name was Lennon. And I knew when I had my son that I didn't want to be a deadbeat. I was intravenously using Oxycontin at that point. I was snorting every Xanax bar I could find. I was pretty much never sober. And what ended up happening was I just knew that I didn't want to be like my dad, because my dad also was an alcoholic on top of gambling. And by the end of his life, he admitted that he was. But I didn't want to be like that, but I also didn't want to change. So it was this weird conundrum I was in. I got in a little bit more legal trouble. I had been in and out of legal trouble, and I got in some more. And I was about to go do some time. And my neighbor across the street is actually an FBI agent, or he was. He ended up coming to the courtroom actually with my father, and they actually were able to get me to go home and agree to get me to go to rehab instead. Kind of called in a little favor thing, and they asked me to go to Teen Challenge, and I agreed, and I went, kicking and screaming against my will pretty much. But I came and it radically transformed my life. Actually, cool thing about him, when I got out of Teen Challenge, he gave me my first car. Wow. When I finished it, he gave me a car. Dang, to help me kind of get my feet back going. So I actually went through Teen Challenge. I'm not just an individual on staff. I've been on staff almost 14 years, but I went through the program before I came on staff. I was in Teen Challenge whenever I came to know Christ. It was about 8 months into my time in the program that I had that radical transformation. And it was one of those moments where I genuinely have never thought about drugs or alcohol again. I've never wanted them again. I've got over 15 years clean. It was a radical transformation that I guess the reason it happened like that with me in part is, yes, it's the supernatural working of God, but more so because I did at least have an understanding of who God was because of my upbringing. Even in my addiction, I never doubted that God was real. I was just rebelling against him, and I knew I was rebelling against him. It's not like I day in and day out thought about rebelling against God, but I did know that I was not living like I was supposed to. I knew that there was a God who created me, and I knew that one day I would have to give an account to him. I just really didn't care. So I was not one of those people who ever didn't really believe in God on like a knowledge way, but I knew how he called me to live, and I knew I didn't want to live that way. So what happened with me is I finally hit the end of myself about 8 months into Teen Challenge, and I realized what I'm doing is not working. So I just literally said, "You're real, and I'll serve you every day for the rest of my life." And I gave my life to him in April of, it'd be 2011. I gave my life to him in April of 2011, and I've genuinely never thought about going back. It's just a snap of a finger kind of thing. So Adult and Teen Challenge of St. Louis, it has been in the St. Louis community since 1966. This year we actually celebrate 60 years of serving the St. Louis community. We are a faith-based program for individuals with life-controlling issues like drug addiction, alcoholism, things of that nature. We've helped over 5,000 people since we started keeping records. We're entirely free of charge. No one pays to be here, and they stay with us for a full year. They get 1,600 hours of discipleship during the time that they're in the program in 1 year. So it's heavily more focused on the discipleship aspect than things that your traditional rehabs are. Like I said, we're celebrating 60 years, and my role, as you asked, in this place is I am the program director, a role I've served in since right on the back end of COVID. Right whenever COVID started to ramp up, we had an individual who was the program director here, and he had gotten sick and things of that nature, and I kind of stepped into that role during that time period and been doing it ever since, almost 6 years. Favorite verse by far, nothing even comes close to it, 1 John 2:6. If anyone claims to live in him, he must walk as Jesus did. There's really no gray area when it comes to how your life should look if you're a Christian. We like to make a lot of gray areas. It really is that simple. It's, do you walk like Jesus walked? Do you live like Jesus walked? If not, 1 John's pretty black and white about you're really not living in him. And that offends some people to talk that black and white, but their problem is not with me or my stance. Their problem is with what Scripture says. It says that if you don't, you're a liar and the truth isn't in you. 1 John's a book that I go to quite frequently for assurance and just for reminders that I abide in him and how he calls me to live. Honestly, it simplifies life a lot. I don't have to make decisions, whereas the old me, whenever bad circumstances would arise, it would be, do I lie to try to manipulate and get out of this? Or do I try to hustle my way out of it or try to squeeze things around so that I can avoid consequences? Now that I'm in Christ, it really takes all the thinking out. And it's just, well, this happened. I got to conduct myself this way and let the consequences fall to him. The guys in Teen Challenge, when I teach, I like to tell them that one of the things about the Christian life is once I started following Christ, it didn't get easier. It actually got harder, because my circumstances did not change just because I talked to the Lord and came to know him in a salvific way. My life didn't change instantly every circumstance. They were the exact same the next day. Now I'm accountable for my attitude and those same things. So now it's even harder. So now I have the same circumstances and my conduct has to be right now. My son Levi, his name's Levi Owen Ainsworth. He's named Levi after the priests in the Old Testament. It's, may your life always be of service before God. Was kind of our thought when we named him that. It's not what Levi means, but it was our thought behind it. May your life always be of service to God. And then his middle name is Owen, and he's named after a theologian from the 1700s, John Owen. A famous quote he had said, "Be killing sin or sin be killing you." And it's just a reminder that in your service of God, remember that you must put to death the sin in your life, or the sin in your life will put you to death. It's just a reminder over him, as we named him. But Levi, when he was 2 weeks old, he had a massive stroke. He lost half his brain. He developed meningitis. They don't really know what came first, meningitis or stroke, because meningitis is a brain infection. They don't really know what happened first. It was all a blur. One day my wife and I just knew something was off. He ended up having to go to ambulance to the children's hospital, and he crashed when he got there. And again, massive stroke. He was on a ventilator for 6 to 8 weeks. Wasn't supposed to live. Multiple times we were told he wouldn't live. And he ended up pulling through. And when he pulled through, they said he would have no quality of life. They said he would remain in a vegetative state all the days of his life if he did. And then after they realized, hey, he might not do that. They said, well, he'll never be able to walk. He'll never be able to talk. And these different things. And man, that little boy runs around our yard. But it's a great story of God's miracle working power. He absolutely moved mightily in Levi's life. But Levi does still have some serious health challenges. Levi has epilepsy and Levi has cerebral palsy. So the right half of his body, he had the stroke in the left half of his brain. The right half of his body just doesn't work good. Going downstairs is tough. It's serious work going up and downstairs. So yeah, he's in epilepsy. He's had a couple of breakthrough seizures over the last 6 months. I think more so just because of medication wasn't, his weight changed and his medication dose didn't go up with it. So I think that's probably what happened. But he did have a couple of breakthrough seizures, which is very unfortunate because after 2 years of none, they were going to try to see if they can get him off meds. So now because he had him, he has to stay on meds for longer and has more appointments and all those things. It's just, there's a lot of stuff with him. But he's our little boy and he's home. I remember one day I was getting ready for work and I watched, I have 7 kids, I have 7 boys. I watched a couple of my older boys run around the yard in the morning, just kind of playing, with each other and stuff like that. And I remember just feeling very overwhelmed with sadness that Levi at that point, we didn't know. At this point when this happened, he wasn't even walking yet. Overwhelmed with sadness that my son would never play with his brothers in the yard, right? Like he would never be able to do that. And it was just grief, grieving the future for him. And I was driving to work that day and I had about a 25-minute drive to work and I was just praying, just thinking, Lord, I want to see my little boy run, and man, those rare times where you hear God speak to you, like, and it's God speaking to you. It wasn't like some booming Charlton Heston voice, but it was God speaking to me. And he promised me in my car, one day he will run and not grow weary. And I was just like, whoa, wow. All right. I got you. But it was just it took one of the most sad mornings I'd had in recent times. And God radically transformed it to be one of the most just comforting moments of my life, And then not that long after that, Levi started walking. The first time he stood up on his own, we didn't even notice it. Because we have so many kids, it's kind of, stuff happens. We're literally sitting on the couch, my wife and I, after everyone else is in bed, and we're just eating. And, I'm eating chips and salsa. And then Levi stands up, and he's just at the couch standing up by me, and I just keep watching TV, and I'm like, hey, bud, And then, like, a minute goes by, and I'm like, I look down, like, wait a minute. Like, he's standing. And my wife took a picture of that moment. That was pretty cool. But the first time he ever stood, and it was just out of nowhere. So, and I've seen God fulfill the promise. Like I said, I believe fully that one day he'll run and not grow weary. But right now, in the meantime, that little boy runs. He has fun with his brothers. But probably the main argument I hear against Christ and against the Lord and all these different things is people doubt his goodness. And I find that what maintains and sustains my faith is just focusing on the goodness of God. But the big thing I have to always remind myself, and I like to remind people at the church I pastor, and I like to remind people here, is we have to remember that our definition of good and God's definition of good don't always line up. And it's our job in those moments to remember that his definition of good supersedes what my definition of good might be. So whenever circumstances befall us in life, if I love him and if I believe I'm called according to his purposes, my Bible tells me in Romans that he works everything out for my good. So I have to remember that even the things that seem negative and even the things that seem overwhelming and stressing and suffering, even those things, at the end of the day, they produce an ultimate good for my life. I just have to remember that it's God's definition of good, not mine. And I have to remind myself of that pretty frequently. Life gets hard sometimes. Life hits left, it hits right. And just when you think it can't get a little bit worse, it seems to be a trap door that falls out under you and you fall a little bit more and life just hits again. And it's like, I have to remind myself daily that he is good and that even the negative things are going to ultimately work for my good. And that's the thing I like to remind people of, is that you just have to remember that it's not what you define good to be. It's what is God's good and perfect plan. My name is Jett. I am human and I surrender.